Hey there, new ruler. Welcome to Force of Will 101, your primer for everything you need to know to play the Force of Will TCG. Class is in session. First up is card types and card anatomy. Force of Will has the following card types: rulers and J-rulers, the center point of Fao's identity; resonators, your main units on the field; additions, cards that modify the battlefield; chants, powerful spells to destroy, modify, or protect; magic stones, the main resource of the game; orders that can represent the power of the gods; runes to be utilized as some rulers with a second hand; as well as regalia, the tools of the gods brought to the field. We'll go over some of the unique card types later, but here are the core similarities among chants, resonators, additions, and regalia. They all have their costs printed in the upper left corner, with the colored circles representing specific will cost, and the numbers in the circle representing the generic will cost. The abilities of the cards are printed here in the text box, and for resonators you can also see their stats printed here, or here based on what cluster the cards were printed in. Now that you've seen the cards, let's look at what the Force of Will field design looks like. The field is where magic zones, additions, J-rulers, and resonators reside once they are in play, and the ruler zones being where your rulers start the game or when they return to when they're destroyed. Then you have outside the game zone, which refers to things revealed from sideboard, the removed from game zone, the graveyard, and then zones for each individual deck, magic stone, and main deck. There's also the Chant standby zone and EX zones, which are more ruler specific and only interact with certain types of cards. The most influential part of a game of Force of Will is the ruler. Rulers serve as the main character of your deck, and they allow you to call magic stones and provide unique abilities accessible to you right at the beginning of the game. One of the most important elements about them is their ability to take the field as a J-ruler throughout different means. There are a few unique types of rulers throughout history, such as a traditional ruler. There are also tag rulers who can partner together with a ruler of the same tag grouping, bond rulers who can't become J-rulers themselves but work together in a set of 3, and order rulers who can turn resonators into J-rulers and grant them new abilities. We'll talk about each of these unique ruler types in just a minute. All rulers have an ability called Energize, which means that if you start the game going second, you produce a will coin that you can spend at any time in the game to produce one will of an attribute shared by your ruler. Another important thing to note about J-rulers is that if they are killed, your ruler will flip back to their ruler side and continue to function as normal, just without being able to turn into a J-ruler again through the judgment process. The only exception to this is order rulers and bond rulers, but more on that later. The concept of ordering was introduced in Dual Cluster and is meant to represent a god giving its power to a chosen champion or resonator that's then taking the field. Rulers that can order grant those powers to the resonators. Once per turn, as long as your ruler is recovered, you can choose to order a resonator while casting it. The ordered resonator then cannot be chased and will always hit the field, even if a replacement effect is in place that would stop it. The order resonator then becomes a J-ruler instead of being a resonator, and gains the ability on the order card, which cannot be removed in any way. And when the ordered resonator dies, the order will flip back to its ruler side, return to the ruler zone, and then you can order again in the future turns. Contracting is a special way to resolve a chant and turn them into a J-ruler. This was linked to the bond rulers we mentioned earlier in the video and was the gimmick of Hero Cluster. Here's an example of a contract. As you can see, when the conditions are met and you have the corresponding ruler, you can flip the chant onto its J-ruler side and put it into the field, while flipping the contracted ruler face down. When the J-ruler dies, the contract returns to its chant side and goes to the graveyard, and the ruler returns to being face up, where it can be contracted again. A couple things to note is that a ruler does not need to be recovered in order to contract, and you can contract multiple times per turn provided the ruler is face up. Magic stones are the main resource for Force of Will, and they start the game in a deck with 10 to 20 cards all by themselves. There's basic magic stones, which you can play any number of copies of, and special magic stones, which you can play a max of 4 copies of any specific stone. By resting a magic stone, you then produce will to play cards based on the ability of the magic stone. Resonators are the main units for your deck. They're the most direct way for you to destroy your opponent's resonators and J-rulers, deal damage, and win the game. All resonators cannot attack or use their abilities which require them to rest on the turn that they enter the field unless they have swiftness, and when a resonator is destroyed, unless otherwise stated, it'll go to the graveyard. A Stranger deck is a mechanic brought into play by the rulers with the Stranger keyword, like this one here. It creates a deck at the beginning of the game of 10 cards with no more than 2 of any given Stranger card within that deck. The ruler then has different ways of accessing this deck and bringing those cards into play, or into the hand, or other zones in various ways. Only rulers that have the stranger keyword may build a list with a stranger deck. Chants are powerful spells that affect the field. Here's an example of one. To perform a chant, you must simply pay the cost, and then as it resolves, you perform the effect printed on the card. Some chants can only be used during your turn, and some chants have quick cast, meaning they can be used at any point in time when you have priority. Runes are a specific type of chant and can be either pure runes or chant runes. Here are some examples on the screen. A rune deck consists of 5 cards, with a maximum of 1 being a master rune. Any ruler can build a rune deck, but only rulers with divinity can make use of cards in the rune deck. When building a rune deck, you may only use pure runes that have a matching attribute of the ruler you're using, but may use any attribute of chant runes. When choosing to cast a rune or chant rune, you may only do so if the divinity total of the runes already revealed, plus the one you are attempting to cast, are equal to or less than the divinity of your ruler. Your rune deck may have a divinity total higher than that of your ruler, but you have to be careful about which ones you're going to use throughout the game. To cast a rune, simply flip it face up and put a copy of the chant on the chase. Whether or not the rune successfully resolves, either via a cancel or some other form of interaction, it stays face up and cannot be used again this game. Additions are essentially artifacts that are placed into the field and apply a generic effect. One looks like this, and the way they work is you simply pay the cost and at resolution put it into the field. If it's an addition resonator, or say something like added to a resonator, then at resolution you will then attach it to the corresponding resonator that you targeted for its effect. Regalia frequently work the exact same way as additions, the only difference being that they are a different card type, so something that targets an addition cannot target a Regalia and vice versa. Some Regalia also have the mythic keyword, which means that you can only control one copy of them at any given time, meaning that if 2 of them head to the field at the same time, the mythic trigger will go on the chase, and at resolution you will be forced to banish one of the 2 copies. There are 2 big terms in Force of Will, abilities and effects, that can really modify the game state. Effects are the result of those modifications, whereas abilities are the things that create those effects. Continuous effects are things that apply for a longer period of time, such as this card's stat negation effect, whereas replacement effects are things that swap what take place and usually involve the word instead, such as what is printed on this card. Continuous abilities, however, are when a card is applying its effect for as long as the card is active. This can be something that grants a keyword, or remove abilities, or even creates replacement effects. A good example is Witch of the Fallen Kingdom, which states that while this card is on the field, your opponent cannot search the deck. It is a continuous ability that creates a continuous effect. Activate abilities, such as the one printed on this card, are usable whenever the controller of that card may play them with priority. Here's some other examples as well. Automatic abilities can be described as any ability that has a trigger condition equals the effect. This includes something like the enter ability to create a trigger, or when this card leaves the field, like on this card. There are a lot of keywords in Force of Will, but let's quickly go over some of the main ones that you might see on more than one card. Astral means that the ruler loses its ability to perform judgment. Imperishable means that if a J ruler is destroyed, it returns to the ruler zone without being made astral. Enter means that whenever the card enters the field from any zone, the effect goes on the chase. Quick cast means that you can cast that card whenever you have priority, not only during your main phase. Remnant means you can cast the card from the graveyard, but after it leaves the chase, it is removed from the game. Awakening is a keyword that lets you pay extra cost for the card, but it adds the additional text to the card upon resolution. Flying means that an attacking J/Resonator with flying cannot be blocked except by other J/Resonators with flying. Precision and target attack are the same ability. They each give a J-Resonator the ability to attack a recovered J/Resonator as if it were rested. Pierce is a keyword that means that if the J/Resonator attacks and is blocked, any damage that the attacking J/Resonator would deal in excess to the blocker is dealt to the original attack for the target. First strike lets an attacker deal damage to the blocker or attack target before the blocker or attack target can deal damage. Swiftness means the entity entering the field does not have summoning sickness, means that it can use its ability that requires it to rest or can attack on the same turn. Drain means that when damage is dealt by the entity with Drain, the player controlling it gains that much life. If a J/Resonator with Bane deals damage to a J/Resonator, the target will be destroyed regardless of how much damage is dealt. Barrier means that the target cannot be targeted by spells or abilities your opponent controls. Eternal means that the entity cannot be destroyed by any means. There are many other keywords that are ruler or archetype specific, and to see what those are, you can check the link in the description below to go to our shorts playlist with each video covering a different keyword. Next up is the chase. The chase is the system that Force of Will uses to determine how cards and effects resolve during a game as players respond to each other. This is very similar to Magic the Gathering's stack. It's important to note first that drawing a card, producing will, or calling stones with your ruler does not use the chase. Whenever a player with priority takes an action, it creates a chase. The player may choose to put multiple things on the chase at once by holding priority and using instant speed cards with quick cast or the abilities of cards on the field that they control or in their hand, but they must pass priority before any individual action resolves. Once priority is passed to the opponent, then they have a chance to add one or more things to the chase as well, though at this point any actions they take must be from cards with quick cast or abilities of cards with instant speed capabilities. If they do decide to take any actions, they must then pass priority back to the original player before anything resolves. During each step of the chase, once each player decides not to add anything new to the chase, the last action put onto the chase will resolve. Then there's a new priority sequence for both players before the next action resolves. You repeat this process over and over again until the chase is empty, and then turn player regains priority. Let's walk through a couple simple examples. For the sake of this argument, we're going to be focusing on the card Pheresia. Player 1 already controls Pheresia on the field and is attempting to cast this chant during their main phase. In response, the opponent plays this spell to attempt to destroy the Pheresia. After passing priority back to the first player uses the ability of Pheresia to give herself barrier and passes back priority to the opponent. The opponent has no additional responses, and so Pheresia's ability to gain barrier will resolve, that they pass priority back and forth before the removal spell resolves. Neither player adds anything, and so the removal spell will fizzle now that Pheresia has barrier, and then we go to the resolution of the original chant. Neither player has any additional actions, and so the chant resolves. At this point, the chase is empty, and the turn player regains priority. Let's use Pheresia for another example. Player 1 is attempting to move to combat with this Resonator. As part of the priority sequence before moving to combat, Player 2 attempts to use this removal spell to destroy the attacking Resonator. He then has to pass priority back to Player 1, who can respond by casting Pheresia from hand as she has quick cast. Player 2 has no response to the cast of Pheresia. At this point though, another priority sequence must be completed before the removal spell resolves, and as such, Player 1 can then use Pheresia's instant speed ability to give his Resonator barrier, thus protecting it. Once again, Player 2 has no response, the barrier effect resolves, neither player adds to the chase before the removal spell, so the removal spell fizzles, and then the player can successfully move to combat. Chases in Force of Will can get complicated, but with practice you'll get the hang of it pretty quick. There are 4 phases of a game turn. First is the draw phase, where there's a priority sequence, and then the turn player draws a card. If you're the first turn player, you skip this phase. Second is the recovery phase, where a priority sequence happens, then all entities of the turn player recover while the produced will ceases to exist, then a priority sequence happens, and then the phase ends. Both players skip their entire first recovery phase, however, any will that happened to have been produced before this skipped phase still vanishes on the first turn. The main phase is the main point of action, where a player can take any number of actions we'll go into in a moment, including entering combat. After a player decides to end the main phase, a priority sequence takes place, and then you move to the end phase. During the end phase, the following things happen. Any beginning of the end phase triggers happen, then player may perform a priority sequence, then end of turn triggers happen, then a priority sequence is performed. Lastly, the following things happen one right after the other. All damage on Resonators or J-Rulers goes to 0, all continuous effects applied until the end of the turn end, all produced will ceases to exist, and then the turn player has to discard to the maximum hand size if they have too many cards. If performing those actions creates a rules process or priority sequence, you repeat the final sequence again after resolving it. After all that takes place, the turn player ends and moves to the next player's draw phase. During the main phase, the turn player may perform actions that require main timing. This means that the chase is empty and they have priority. Quick cast spells may also be cast, as they can be used during any other time the player might have priority, of course. The first and most common example would be to call a Magic Stone from the Magic Stone deck by resting a J/ruler that you control. The turn player may also cast any Resonator, Addition, Chant, Regalia, or Rune spell that does not have the quick cast keyword. Another action that takes place is initiating combat, which we'll talk about in a bit. A pivotal turn in many decks that utilize old-fashioned J-Rulers can often include performing the Judgment process. This involves paying the cost on the ruler to flip the card over to its J-Ruler side and having it enter the battlefield from the ruler zone. When the turn player is done with their main phase, they pass priority to their opponent, and when their opponent also passes priority, the main phase comes to a close. When When the turn player decides to enter combat, they simply declare that they wish to go into combat and then perform a priority sequence. Once that is resolved, the turn player declares their attack by declaring the attacker and the attack target, which can be either their opponent or any rested J/Resonator the opponent controls. After attackers are declared, there is a priority sequence where either player can choose to respond. From there, we move into the declaration of blockers. Your opponent can choose to block with any J/Resonator that is recovered, even if it came into the field this turn. To block, you simply rest the target blocker. After blockers are declared, another priority sequence takes place, and after then, we move into damage. Damage is dealt simultaneously, unless the attacking creature has the ability First Strike. After damage has resolved, both players perform a rules process to see if any of their attacking or blocking Resonators or J-Rulers has enough damage to be killed, and then moves it to the graveyard. From there, the turn player returns back to their main phase and can choose to re-enter combat with another Resonator should they wish to. If the first player attacks something and the opponent goes to block, and then that blocker is killed, the initial damage will go towards the initial attack target. When building your deck, you have to consider the format of cards that you can use. The main competitive format for Force of Will is called Wanderer. It encompasses every card that was released beginning in Grim Cluster all the way through the most current set. The only restrictions are the ban list, cards that cannot be used at all, and the combination ban list, which are cards that can be used by themselves but never together in the same list. The main deck consists of 40 to 60 cards with no more than 4 copies of any one card of a given name. The Stone deck consists of 10 to 20 cards with no more than 4 of any one special magic stone of a given name. The side deck consists of 0 to 15 cards that you may swap in and out between games of a match. As a reminder, you cannot have more than 4 copies of any given card between your main, stone, and sideboard. Now that we've gone over a lot of subjects, it's time to talk about how to begin a game. After each player sits down and shuffles their main, magic stone, and any other decks that they're bringing to the table, they put them in their respective zones. Then the first turn player is decided. First turn player must be chosen at random, typically done by rolling 2d6 and seeing who has the higher result, but any other true random method can be utilized. Whoever wins the random decision must go first. After deciding first turn player, starting with that player, each player draws 5 cards from the top of their main deck to make their starting hand, and after this, each player has one chance to mulligan any number of cards to try to fix the cards in your hand. Mulliganing means choosing any number of cards in your hand, putting them on the bottom of the deck, and then redrawing that many cards. After mulligans are performed, each player sets their starting life total based on their rulers, and then the game begins. As we close out this Force of Will 101 primer, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to watch it, and thank you so much for being part of this Force of Will community. I hope you have a wonderful time. To see it all put together, I invite you to click the link in the description below or up in the card on the screen to go watch one of the recent starter deck games that we played using some of the Hero Cluster starter decks from 2022. It's an excellent showcase of exactly kind of the ins and outs of the mechanics, as well as just seeing the game being played in real life. I hope this primer was helpful, but feel free to join our Discord to be able to ask all kinds of other questions or find people to play with. You can also check out our video playlist of shorts that's going to go in depth on more niche mechanics that are found throughout the cards of Force of Will, so that you know a little bit about exactly how that specific mechanic works if you're interested. Again, thank you so much for being here. Glad to have you at Ruler School, and until next time, class dismissed.